streaming on YouTube Live. My name is Matt Price, Manager of Enablement. You can see that I'm joined with two very special guests, one that you've seen before, our Senior Sales Engineer, Ryan, and we also have a very special guest from Storage Review, Mr. Brian Beeler. So real quick, before I pitch it to Brian, we want to keep this as interactive as possible. So if you guys have any questions as we go through the show, please feel free to leverage either of the chat platforms, whether it's on LinkedIn or YouTube. We have a few moderators in the chat, and we can, of course, answer some of your questions live if you have them. So with that said, welcome to the show. Brian, super excited to have you here. Welcome. Thanks for joining us. Why don't you give us a little bit of backstory on Storage Review and what you guys do?
Man, I already am uncomfortable with this format. I'm used to asking all the questions. So the fact that you two are on either side asking me questions is somewhat troubling to start. So just so we know that at the jump, I'm already uncomfortable with the two of you. That said, yeah, I mean, we've got this lab here in Cincinnati. We've got 8 racks of gear. And for all of the IT coverage that's out there in the world, we try to make ours feel a little more real by seeing, touching, feeling stuff. And whether that's in our lab or it's us going to someone else's lab, we've been on the road a bunch this year already. And we're just trying to bring real topical conversations about enterprise IT to our audience, whether it's on the website at storagereview.com, or as you guys know, we're on pretty much every social media platform. We even launched a Discord this week. So we're trying to take the content to where the people are and have those conversations, whether it's photo shoot of like your appliance when it came in, that got a ton of engagement on LinkedIn and Reddit. I mean, we had 50 or 60 questions just from a photo shoot on Reddit. So the excitement for IT media consumption is out there, and we're just trying to help bring that to people wherever they are.
That's awesome. That's awesome. So you joke about being uncomfortable. You're going to have the Object First crew in stereo on either side of you today for the show.
That's why I only wore AirPods, so I can only listen in one ear.
Awesome. So Brian, what we thought we would do is first just open it up and go through a couple ideas or concepts about the Ootbi appliance, start to finish. Obviously, we bang our drum. I've got the orange Kool-Aid over here. We work for Object First, but we would love to hear from your personal experience getting it racked in the lab. So when you look at just the unboxing, the ease of use of the Ootbi appliance from the time that you take it out to the time you're actually ready to configure it and bring it into Veeam, what was that like, in the real world for you?
Well, I would say that even before that, because we've been tracking your progress, I guess, for maybe a year and a half. I mean, since you guys have been out there publicly saying, hey, we're coming with this, we're bringing this direct object appliance to market for Veeam, which is great because, I mean, we've seen the hardware for 8 months and talked to you guys and Tony and other parts of the team. And I know, part of it's, you're in development and you're doing this thing kind of publicly, which is cool. At the same time, you're waiting for Veeam V12 to get out there and launch. And so, for you guys, it was kind of like a hurry up and wait and develop and hurry up again. And that was exciting. So we watched all of that happen and we're part of that at VeeamON and VMware Explore. I almost called it VMworld, and other places where we run into you guys at trade shows. Mm-hmm. So when we got the box in, we were, there was some sense of closure just by receiving it, right? We hadn't even done anything yet, but it was like,
real.
Oh, yeah, it is real. These guys are real. Well, I had talked to like my buddy Rick Vanover over at Veeam. He and I went to kindergarten together, or pre-kindergarten, as he'll tell you if you ask him.
Very cool.
Yeah, he's got a weird memory like that. But we were talking at the Veeam Analyst Summit they did down in Florida last year, and he said, "Man, this is real. I mean, we're playing with it in the lab and seeing it, and that was before our box came in." So you asked a question I haven't bothered to answer yet. What was it like? I mean, it comes in, it's in a regular box. You pull it out, you rack it. I mean, it's simple business. What was most impressive was that you guys actually shipped the bezels. So for all the enterprise IT gear that we get in, we almost never get bezels because I don't know what it is.
Wow.
I don't know why they're so unobtainium, but bezels are hard. I guess that's the last thing that people figure out. So it had a bezel, has a nice orange bezel on it. It's in the rack. The bezel's actually on it. We haven't lost it or misplaced it yet.
Right on.
And so that's pretty cool. So yeah, we got it. We we might have even used the rails, which would be impressive for Kevin, and put it in, gave it power, and then didn't do anything. So it comes with a I don't know, like a 2.5 by 3 foot, flip
Yeah.
sided, quick start guide. And I said, Kevin, we ought to get this, go through our part of this process and be ready for when we do the deployment with Object First. So we work with you guys remotely, and we can get into that to do the deployment. He's like, yeah, we'll do it later. And so we literally did almost nothing until 8 minutes before the deployment call. But the box to rack, I mean, it's just the same as any other 2U server. Easy business.
Awesome. Yeah. I know we scheduled a little bit longer of a time window than apparently you needed.
Was that okay? So who did that? Because I've got a grievance about that. Was that
I'm just
you?
gonna walk out of the picture right now. No, you always gotta be ready for things. You never know what's gonna happen, what place we're in. I didn't know if we were gonna jump into some of the Veeam part at that time, but if it was truly Object First, yeah, I would have reduced that down to the 20 minutes. That was overkill at that point too.
Right. So in our environment, we run Veeam already. So we run V11. We have. I mean, I guess we probably look like an SMB, or maybe in some cases an SME, with not a lot of good hygiene. So we have a lot of VMs and a lot of different places and a lot of different states. Most of our stuff isn't really production, but we do have some NetApp appliances up. We've got data that we do want to protect. All the performance data we collect. We've got some NVR stuff. We've got all sorts of other things around in the lab, just like it's probably pretty normal. We were on V11, so V12 was out when we went to do this setup, but we were on V11, so we had to do a two-stepper. So the first thing we did was get your appliance up and ready, and then we had Rick and his team came down from Columbus, and we did the V12 upgrade a couple weeks after that, and then connected the two, and off we went. But yeah, with your install, so I told you, Kevin, waited till about 8 to 10 minutes before the phone call to go through our portion of direct connect, give it an IP, whatever that initial thrust is. And I said, yeah, I think you scheduled for like 1 o'clock or 2 o'clock. I said, Kevin, I'm going to go down and have lunch, because they booked 2 hours for this. I assume the first 15 minutes is going to be screwing around with IPs, messing around with IPs. And, because it's always the networking with these things. Every single time there's a problem, it's always networking. And our networking's is a slow moving car crash too. So, I mean, we have a lot of challenges because we're a lab. We're tearing things up and down every single day. And so it's messy. The cables are a disaster. Anyway. So I anticipated there'd be trouble. So I went down and I said, I'm going to go down and have lunch. When I come back up, we'll do a TikTok live stream or an IG stream or something, just to show people what we've got going on. So I'm downstairs eating, I don't know, a sausage or something. And 8 minutes, 10 minutes goes by. Kevin texts me or messages on Slack, hey, we're done. And I thought, done like, I'm right. You're ready for me to come up and start the live? And he's like, no, done. We're all the way done. I'm like, oh. So it was sort of anticlimactic. We had no live stream, which would have been the shortest one in our history. We had no problems, which was actually pretty rare for things that we deploy in the lab. Not that anything's really all that complicated anymore, but there's usually something, right? And we popped. The UI was there. He made a bucket, and then we sat and waited for V12 upgrade.
Right on. That sounds very similar to our experience, when we deployed in our lab. So once you got past the Object First configuration, bringing it into y'all's existing Veeam environment, what was it like there? Was it just simply adding in the S3 endpoint and away you go, or kind of what was your take on that?
I don't know if I closed out why I was angry at you though for the deployment time. There was a 2-hour block scheduled.
I know. I apologize on that. That was, again, I always want to be prepared. I'd rather have, more time than not enough time, depending on what happens. Messing around with IPs, as you mentioned, get into the web UI if things were, to be a little funky there at some point. But again, always got to put trust in our product, which is always simple and what our customers have been seeing as well so far.
All right, it took 12 minutes, so 2
Nice.
hours was excessive. If you need 2 hours, I understand it. We're not the sharpest guys. We don't read manuals. We as clearly didn't do any prep work. So anyway, it's fine. I would much rather have the time back and have the thing just work than have to mess around with it.
Yeah.
There was another follow-up question about Veeam, right? So the Veeam team came down. We sat around the conference table, updated V12. That took 20 minutes and no pain there.
Mhm.
That was super simple. And yeah, it was just like point Veeam backup and recovery to the S3 endpoint, and it just went. I mean, we just kicked off the first backup and off we went. Yeah, I mean, that was easy too. I'm sure if you have a more complicated Veeam environment, or you've got a lot of gateways or whatever, ours is pretty simple and pretty flat. But
Mhm.
even then, we contemplated adding some more gateways. Kevin might have added one more just to kind of pick the pace up a little bit.
Sure.
But yeah, I mean, it just went. That first ingest happened, and off you go. I mean, I think there is one really good coaching opportunity for both you guys and Veeam, and I'm sure you're doing it, and we just didn't read it. But with immutability being there, with that being so fundamental to your architecture, and I'd like to hear a little bit more from you guys actually on how your customers are seeing that. It makes it really easy to make everything immutable, but there's a trade-off there, right? Because you've got to be careful. Like, do I really need immutability for this, or do I just want standard protection? And that's one that I think for the SMBs that might use this, or even your channel partners that are managing these devices for their customers, that's an important conversation to really understand your data and your environment.
It is, yeah. I mean, on that point, I think it really comes back to a lot of internal discussion. I think we talked a lot about this in our last LinkedIn Live. Is understanding what needs to be immutable. I mean, we think everything does, but how long does it need to be immutable for? Because a
Yeah,
lot of times, if
that's
you're
the good point. Yeah.
if you're going to recover a virtual machine, usually it's going to be within 24 hours, maybe 36, 48 hours, depending on what needs to be recovered. So you don't need that immutability for 7 days at that point. I would say 7 days, 14 days is really that sweet spot when we're talking to customers what they're wanting. There are some upwards around 30, maybe even longer, and maybe it just depends on that data. But I think to keep in mind, it's your backup that's being protected from immutability, right? So if there was something that took place already inside that virtual machine, that immutability is really not going to affect it once it's restored, because it could resurface. But that's
Right.
where Veeam and their tools with the data labs, doing the secure restore, getting it cleaned up before connecting to the network will protect it for the future after that recovery. But knowing that the backups can't be affected, and you can go to the last 24-hour backup because it's immutable. Nothing can affect it. You can recover from it. So.
Yeah, you're right, Ryan. We actually touched on some of those things on our last LinkedIn Live, and we called it misunderstood settings, or potentially misunderstandings of certain settings in Veeam, because there are essentially two places that you're setting retention. There's the immutability window, but there's also the backup retention. And if you don't architect those just right, let's say you give the immutability window longer than you actually set your backup window, Veeam is going to have a problem, obviously, pruning data and applying retention policies. So there are certain things that you need to architect out and plan for accordingly, exactly to your point.
Yeah, and I don't think it's heavy lifting. It's just part of the conversation, and having good practices to just make those decisions at the beginning, and be able to make sure you're protecting the data that you want, and have the retention policies that you want, and just put some thought into it.
Yeah.
It's possible that we didn't put a lot of thought into that, and we might have done some self-inflicted damage there. But again, I mean, that's not anything having to do with Veeam or you guys. It's just that there are a lot of tools and capabilities within Veeam V12, and there's some options within Objects First GUI, and you just have to have a thought out plan in terms of what you're trying to do and what you want to do.
Yeah. Couldn't agree more. And one of the other things I wanted to bring up, as a point of conversation, and certainly you've been around storage for forever, right, Brian? But when you look at typical storage, block and file, and the new player in the space with being object storage, why are we seeing more and more customers starting to leverage object storage as the de facto standard for their backups versus some of your traditional, storage devices? I know we have our take on it, but in your opinion, what's your vision on that?
Well, I don't know if you guys lead with this, but one of the big differentiators that you offer, I think, is going to ultimately come down to cost. And I hate to, I mean, you guys might be bristling a little bit at that, and I hate to boil it down to such a low level, but especially in the SMB SME, I mean, we've seen uh, data protection appliances be somewhat monolithic and sometimes quite expensive to maintain and refresh and license and all of that.
Mhm.
Um, I don't know that there's anything wrong with a traditional appliance, and just like backups, like anything else, if it's worked for you, it's always worked for you, and you're happy with it, and you don't mind, like, then great. I mean, those customers are going to stay on those types
Yeah.
of appliances, and that's going to be a hard win for you. If it's an organization, though, that wants to look at the new capabilities of performance, the pricing advantages that something like this may offer them, and even the performance advantages, not just in backup, but you guys have a little bit of flash in the system. I mean, there's some other things here that to be fair, aren't exactly rocket science, but they do make a big difference in the
Right.
in the overall usability and the OpEx of the system. Um, one of the big questions we got when we started talking about, hey, we've got this appliance in and we're working on it. One of the big questions is, okay, well, I get that it's object. I get that V12 supports direct to object, and this is kind of like the new way of communicating with Veeam and its efficient data path and all this sort of thing. Uh, but one of the big ones was, how is object first different, I suppose, from any other object storage? If I wanted to send it to, half a dozen other object deployments, why is this different? And that's one little piece of nuance that I think is really important. I know part of it's because of the APIs and the integration that you've done with Veeam, but
Mhm.
if I'm I know you're asking me, but now if I ask you, because that's my natural inclination, I think that's one of the more important things to communicate with the market, and I'm sure you're doing that. But
Yeah.
I the API integration and some of the key benefits there are a big differentiator in my view.
Yeah, I mean, you're exactly right on that. And the biggest piece probably is the API integration and
Mhm.
leveraging that from Veeam, and that we are purpose built around that API, being one of the first vendors to fully support the API with version
Mhm.
12. And that allows, us to do a lot of things. And one of the, I'd say, pros to object storage when it comes to the metadata, right? That smart object storage API sends the data a certain way into object storage. That allows us at Object First to take that data, put it how we would like within that object first Ootbi cluster. In the long run, could move that data around because of that metadata. It can load balance from node to node. We can load balance across all the physical network connections. I mean, I know you have a single node,
Mhm.
and you probably notice, we communicate across the two physical NICs that are
Yeah.
hooked up to the network versus just that single S3 endpoint, which is actually serving up the S3 storage. And what also makes that simple is when you need to add, right? There's a join to cluster within our text user interface, and you add that storage in. Well, that's all you got to do. You go back into the web UI, you see there's a second node. It's eventually going to load balance the smart entities, as the smart object storage likes
Mhm.
to call it, or the API from Veeam. And there's nothing in Veeam you're having to go do. You're not having to go adjust jobs. You're not having to add that in as another repository. It's all done through the single S3 endpoint that was already added into Veeam. So that really comes down to almost infinite scalability. At some point, beyond the 4 node limitation we have currently. I saw that question out there. We could probably touch on that at the end, but simplicity is really wanting to keep it truly that turnkey solution for
Yeah.
not just deploying but also expanding.
Yeah, and I think fundamentally you're right too. I mean, the simplicity of you're right. Within Veeam, I make the connection to the bucket, and from there, if you guys are managing that bucket and how that presents back to the BNR the software,
Mhm.
then yeah, it's seamless to Veeam. Veeam doesn't have to know anything, and it is simple to configure. I mean, we just made, for our purposes, made a bucket, shoved everything in there, and
Yeah.
that was fine.
Sure.
The GUI, I don't know. There's, to be fair, there's not a ton of administration to be done in the thing, but I've spent some time in it, and I'm not a backup and recovery practitioner, but as I go through and look at, here's the system, here are the NICs, here are the ones that are active. We're using 2 of the 4 on there.
Yep.
Here are the drives. Here's the health data. Here's just visibility into the system, the dashboard with the percentage, the little wheel of what's being used, so you can do some capacity planning, which is great. We had an update on ours. I don't know how often you guys are updating, actually, so I'd like to talk about that a little bit.
Sure.
But yeah, ours had a little update, and I said, hey, is this safe to click? Because just as a practitioner, well, as a non-practitioner, but someone who had access to the GUI, which is the worst of all combinations.
Right.
Someone that not only doesn't know what they're doing, but has access to the update button. Is this safe? Because I don't know in other appliances necessarily, when we hit the update button, is it going to run a power cycle? And if so, that's okay. I just need to understand that and know what the implications are to our workloads. So I hit the update, and it just went, and it took seriously 27 seconds, and it was done, and there was not a reboot. It was just back, and I guess that speaks to the architecture a little bit in terms of the way you built this thing, so that there's, I don't want to say there's not a lot to it. Clearly, there's a lot going on behind the scenes, but you've taken a lot of that complexity away from the end user and made it really, really simple. And we're not, I'm not just sitting here saying that. It just is.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean, it comes back to, I mean, our dev team and the founders really putting the thought in what's going to make a change in a Veeam infrastructure to solve the repository issue of something simple, something powerful, and they did that. And truly, the updates, and as you mentioned, they're very quick. They're not causing a reboot. I'm sure maybe from a version 1 to version 2, that it could be a possibility. Time will tell on that. But again, what they've strived for, to take time back from end users so they can work on other projects. They don't have to worry about babysitting their repository. And it also goes for the fact that everything is running on that hardened Linux OS. There's not only is it going to update the object for Ootbi software, it will also grab any of the patches needed for the underlying OS to keep it secure and keep it hardened as well.
Yeah,
and they don't have to jump into command line.
Yeah, I did see that. So when you go through the update process, there's a little box comes up. It says there's a 1 point whatever update for you guys, and then there was a grayed out because there were no updates for the underlying kernel, which is nice because now that means I don't have to or can't log into the underlying OS and manipulate or cause any trouble there, right? Because
correct.
Your part of your value proposition is that you're taking all that management, they're putting it together. And so now I don't have to administer the server and the software separately or worry about lifecycle updates for whatever the NICs or the SSDs if there's a firm or whatever, right? Because you're gonna do all that within your interface. But so I know you want to ask me, but I'm going to turn it again because I can't help myself. So what is the update cadence for you guys for the Ootbi software, and what does that look like for the end users? Are you trying to hit quarterly, monthly? Like what's the program look like?
Yeah, right now it's been about monthly, and I think it just depends on, especially in the stage that we are right now, if things do pop up that need to be fixed. I mean, we're definitely pushing things out, probably a little more frequent than they will. But I think that's important. We want to make sure things get fixed, for the end users with those updates, and then hopefully get on that cycle, and then have the release notes and everything available, for end users to look and see what is actually being updated, what's actually changing with their environment. But yeah, I would say time will tell a little bit more on that. Again, the first release here with version 1. Again, making sure that we get things ironed out. But again, nothing has been significantly serious as far as some of the issues out there. So
yeah, I mean, we haven't seen any catastrophic or data risk kind of stuff. Veeam did have a patch that we deployed. There's a KB out there for some updates, and I mean this is common territory for new things, right? You put it out there, it works, and for exactly as it should for almost everyone. But then you start finding the edge cases, and then that's why you update and move on.
Yeah.
But the simplicity in updating even the V12 was easy for us too. So hasn't been a problem for us so far.
Yeah, you guys have talked about a lot of points, and some of the things that really resonate for me when you look at the value prop, to your point, Brian. I feel like simplicity across the board is really huge for us, because you're right. You're taking the ability away purposely for someone to be able to drop to command line and install a custom kernel patch and do this and that could corrupt the system. And when you look at alternatives that that Veeam has built in, there's the hardened Linux repository, and we've chatted about that previously on a LinkedIn Live. And while that's a capability, that requires someone with Linux expertise to actually go and configure. And then what happens if there's an issue? Like, who is the support contact? And that's a big thing for us, because we do have a support department. So if there's any issues with the box itself, we have someone, to phone call and actually get in contact with support to troubleshoot anything in the cumulative setup, right? So it's not just Ootbi, but if it turns out to be a Veeam issue, we have connections with Veeam support on the back end. So you're not going to get the finger pointing game that unfortunately is all too common, in the industry. So to me, that's one more part of the overarching simplicity message. Support, that's part of, the way we deliver that value to the Veeam customer. So
yeah, and to be fair, we haven't used the formal support matrix yet. I'm sure we will as we work through the process and break things and whatever, because we're always, as I said, tearing things up and down in the lab.
Yep.
I mean, for Veeam, it's like, hey, I was just backing up 450 VMs yesterday, and all of a sudden you've got 3 nodes offline. The storage is now, Ethernet. It was fiber channel yesterday. I mean, we do all sorts of crazy stuff.
Yeah.
So we will cause problems, and I'm sure we'll pursue a ticket at some point. But that is good to know. I mean, I think from an organization standpoint, everyone says simplicity, but it's like you almost don't know what simple is until you see it and experience it, because the industry's been saying simple for years, and we're in the middle of this movement for SAN storage and NAS storage to disassociate software from hardware, and we've got new models, licensing, and support. I mean, it's all there's always flux and change in the industry, but the simplicity message is one that a lot of people talk about, but until you see it and feel it, you really don't. It really doesn't click. And from my standpoint, ultimately, I run storage review in the business, right? The last thing I want to do is worry is our limited set of production data protected, and is Kevin or someone else on our team having to blow a lot of time administering back. I just want it to work, know it's there, and know that we can recover when we do something stupid. I mean, this is just like fundamental blocking and tackling.
Yeah.
And I don't want to pay a backup admin. We're not big enough, but even if I were, I don't want to have a backup admin. I want my virtualization team to be able to handle this, or my apps team, or whatever.
Yeah.
And it's sort of just the harsh reality of the economic situation that we're all in. There's no budget for extra people. Everyone's got to be upskilled and a little more flexible. And this thing, like I said, if I can run updates on it, and I'm clearly not a virtualization admin or an IT admin, it's really, really easy.
Yeah, I've been saying forever, everybody's simple until they're not. And with ransomware on the rise, we all know, that's of course the hot topic, this year. So, Ryan, I know even with Ootbi, we've got additional measures. So we've already got the hardened Linux operating system on the back end. So no command line access. You can't get in there and play around with configuration settings like we've talked about at the kernel level.
Yep.
But we've also increased security with, additional measures, right, that we can enable in the GUI.
Yeah, we sure can. I mean, there's a couple things that we do from the beginning, once it is set up, and depending on how it was set up. But IPMI is an option to access the TUI that we have, but you can also just go keyboard monitor straight to the server, set it up that way. Once you have actually gone through that initial process, we disable SSH right away. if IPMI was the choice for the setup, you'll have a nice yellow ribbon says, "Hey, IPMI is enabled." Yeah,
Yeah, we
maybe
have that on
use it
ours.
as a. And I mean, there's two different boats. I've talked to a lot of customers like, "Yeah, we're going to disable it." I've talked to others, "Oh, we want to be able to manage server, and we have security practices on our network to be able to keep that up and running." So, there's definitely different thoughts about that. But two-factor authentication is another big one, right? Enabling that, and not only for just logging into the web UI, but also if you go to try to enable SSH, it's going to call for the two-factor authentication. Or if you have disabled IPMI, you try to re-enable that. So a lot of those settings are specific, and will call on the two-factor to make sure that they can go through. So. And not to mention, once you disable everything, you can't have access. I mean, I'm surprised Brian didn't have his baseball bat with him, from some of our previous calls. But
It's
I mean, the
upstairs. I'll go
physical
get it if
access,
you
yes.
want.
The physical access is, where I mean, I think anybody can't, can draw the line of or where they can't, necessarily protect and with their immutable backups. But
Yeah.
but we do all we can on our back end, so there is no access. The object versus user that gets set up in the setup has no privilege rights for anything if something was to get in there. But
Yeah, I think you can never be too careful, with ransomware and different type of cyber threats. I mean, there's also the malicious, attack. Could be a disgruntled employee, somebody trying to, wipe everything on their way out of the company. And yet that's another way that we protect customers' backup data. Essentially, it's zero trust. Once everything is set up, it's set up and it's going to be immutable for the time window that's set. So, from A to Z, from our perspective, of course, we really keep security at top of mind.
Hey, I'm curious. I mean, I know it's early days for you guys, and I don't even know what the customer count is yet, but this is early. Have you had I'm sure you have, but have you had a customer come to you yet and be like, "Hey, we put you guys out there, and already within the first couple weeks or months or whatever, you bailed me out of some trouble." Has that popped up?
not quite yet. But I think those days are coming where, something's going to happen. And, luckily their immutable backups were out there and not sitting on a NAS or SIF share that maybe they replaced, right? Where something got permission, maybe a service account that just started crawling, anything on the network. So obviously with the S3, API layer, and again, immutable within that, we want to make sure they're protected. So I'm sure those stories will come, and we'll have a lot of those success stories and, posts on our website.
Or it's happened and they just don't want to admit it. I mean, so this is one of the interesting things. So we just did a chat on AI, so generative AI, everyone's hottest topic at the moment.
Mhm.
And we've got a guy on our team that's Jordan, who's really leading our efforts around AI and machine learning and this generative AI notion. And it's amazing what you can do with these tools. You can take like a chat GPT instance and shoot it at your knowledge base in your organization. And you can have this go learn communications and learn your company information and learn all of these things to be able to be a super intelligent chatbot that's actually good and not frustrating and annoying.
Mhm.
But at the same time, like, these things can spin off other AIs, and you can have multiples of them in your organization. And NVIDIA actually is putting out some stuff today around how do we start to protect ourselves from what these tools can do. So you talk about what could go wrong. It would be super easy for somebody that's not well trained in data science and AI to get access to some of these tools that are super easy to use, but not understand the implications of some of the decisions they're making.
Yeah.
And
Sure.
no one started out intending to have a rogue AI or an AI that could modify data or whatever, but it's not impossible.
Right.
And these types of things will be happening. So on top of the stuff we already worried about, like, there's a whole new layer of
Yeah.
AI stuff to be concerned about in terms of data protection.
Yeah.
It's pretty serious. Plus, then these things make a bunch of data on the back end, and now I've got, if I was forecasting whatever our data growth was for our SQL server and our hosted exchange and our VDI users and all those things,
Yeah.
if I throw these new workloads in, the implications for what I have to protect are now really, really huge. So we just did a pi computation. We went to 100 trillion digits. It's the largest, matches the largest ever run. We just did it a lot faster than Google, but the working set is half a petabyte of storage.
Yeah.
The output is a 100 terabyte file that even after we chopped it and compressed it down, was 200 gig files, so 40 terabytes of data that we just created out of nowhere.
Wow.
Not nowhere, but I mean, it
Yeah.
was a concerted effort of what a business would do that would be data analytics.
Mhm.
And we've enabled these guys because we're a progressive company trying to make the most of our data. But now my
Mhm.
data science guy just made 40 terabytes of new data out of whole cloth and wants to protect it. Okay, that changes the metrics for what I've got to do from a data protection side. So you
Yeah.
guys are talking about growing through additional appliances. That's a very real problem, and one that if we start backing up more of this AI stuff, we're going to slam into the wall, way faster than we ever thought possible.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that certainly speaks to the ease of scalability variable. I mean, imagine trying to scale like a typical RAID 6 array manually. That's not exactly easy
Yeah,
or time consuming. It takes a lot of time to do. So, yeah, completely
absolutely.
agree. So all the bullet points that I wanted to cover, I know we've hit on. We talked about just the deployment, your experience with deployment. We've talked about your experience with integrating it into Veeam. We've also been chatting about really your post-install, experience. What's it been like to use? And, have you had to babysit it? And it sounds like
No,
that's a
I
no.
believe me, I'd love to complain about it. I mean, we like to tell the whole story of,
Yeah.
hey, it was really good at these 8 things, but if you're doing these 3, you're not so much. I mean, we
Right.
really haven't had any troubles. I mean, we did in full disclosure, Kevin did go a little nuts with immutability, and so we we owe ourselves a little bit of blame and shame for not really thinking through that. But that's why I said that at the beginning, is because you give these tools and you make them simple, and that's fantastic.
Mhm.
But we should also, as an industry, and I know you guys are doing it, but I'm just speaking, generally, we should just be thinking about what this means. And I think a lot of companies, while mutability has been around for a little while, Veeam's been banging that drum for at least the last 18 months, probably longer.
Yeah.
Um, but it does have an impact, and we just need to think about that a little
Mhm.
bit more. What does it give me? And do I really need it for as long as I think I do? And
Yep.
that's true with everything. It's true with snapshots. Just because I
Yeah.
can snap an array every 18 seconds, do I really need to do that on every volume? I mean,
Right.
maybe, but probably not.
Yep.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
think that. Oh, I was just saying, I think that not only is pointed towards on-prem storage and understanding that, but a lot of that movement that customers are taking to the cloud and wanting that immutability in the cloud. A lot of times, just not understanding the economics behind it. That okay, that 90-day immutability takes that very cheap storage to have that long-term backup retention now turns into a pretty price to pay for that retention. They just don't understand until they get that bill after that first 90 days of we're only supposed to be keeping this many restore points, but then they're like, oh, we turned our immutability on, and
Yeah.
they understand it. So again, I think it comes back to that big topic of just internal discussion helps with that, from a customer perspective and any data protection practices. So.
Well, I mean, there's the whole access to the cloud too challenge where cloud does so many things really, really well. Um, in the term, in the terms of backup and recovery, I like it as an offsite replica copy, whatever. Get something that's out of the building, and that's fine. I don't personally love it as a primary target, just because when I need something and we haven't failed a VM or lost one or
Mhm.
killed one and needed to spin one back up, it's just a matter of time until we do something silly and need to do that. But I want it. I just want it on prem, and maybe I'm just a bit of a
Right.
control freak, but I want it on prem and I want it fast, so that we don't have to wait to pull data back, or it's just a drag. So that same 40 terabytes of data that we had from our Pi computation, the next thing was, what are we going to do with this data? Because I don't really want to hold it forever either, because at
Right.
a certain point, it's not business critical anymore.
Mhm.
There's if it was data from some sort of business analytics process that we ran, we'll make some decisions with it, and then we'll move on like to the next set of data. but I may not want it in my primary infrastructure, but I might want it available just in case, we want to bring it back. And for that, the
Sure.
cloud's fantastic. But even that, for me to move 40 terabytes of data, and we've got a decent internet connection. We're not like DoD level of hardwire into the internet, but it would take us about 45 days to move that data. I think was one of the computations Kevin was looking at. If we saturated that, and assuming that we're not doing anything else on our network that would need to upload,
Yeah.
so we're filling up some snowballs and firing them over to AWS that way. So,
Yeah.
but all these data migration issues and data movement issues, I mean, they're all super fundamental to looking at what your business processes are, and for backup and recovery. I'm fine with cloud for offsite. I just don't love it for primary.
Yeah, I mean, to me, it goes back to the best possible strategy when you're thinking holistically, end to end. We've all been banging the 3-2-1 drum forever. And, essentially what Ootbi is trying to be is that, exactly to your point, that high performing on-prem initial target that's also immutable, so that if you need to get that data back quick, or you need to leverage some of Veeam's other capabilities, Ryan threw out data labs earlier. So there's a lot of things that Veeam has innovated over the past years that leverage existing data. So having performance on key is going to be paramount for that, or on-prem is going to be key for that. And, Ootbi powers that. And I think that's critical, but it's also important, exactly like you've been talking about, Brian, is not to forget the rest of the story, like a famous radio host used to say, right? It's, you still need to get it offsite. It still needs to be geographically diverse. So if something were to happen, at the data center, you still have an out. And I mean, Ootbi's not going to throw up a shield and protect against a meteor, or he's not waterproof. So
I
there's
can
other
test for that
problems.
if you want. We'll chuck that bad boy in the pool and see.
It's not IP66 rated, I don't think.
All right, fine. We won't do it, but
you found our weakness. We won't survive underwater.
Good. Well, so, you're very high in the rack. You're in the top third, so it would take severe flooding for us to lose it.
That's awesome. Well, guys, this has been awesome. From my perspective, I feel like we've hit on the main things we wanted to cover. Brian, I would love to hear some final, closing thoughts from you before we wrap things up.
Yeah, I mean, I don't want to sound like just a parrot of what we've been saying the whole time, but we've been watching you guys, like I said at the beginning, for the last year and a half, watching the progress of the company, seeing what's coming, and you guys have been talking about the value of direct to object for a very long time, and it's exciting. I mean, you guys are probably doing backflips, but it's exciting for us to finally see it come to fruition. We've put the appliance to work in our lab. We're working on it as a customer would right now. I mean, all of our data, we've replaced our old backup infrastructure, so you guys are getting all of it, and I mean, it just kind of goes. I hate to make it sound so boring, but backup should probably be boring. If I want some excitement, give me a RAID 0 flash array. That's exciting, but that's not where I want my backups. And I don't want to have to stand up a critical VM on RAID 0 flash either for very long.
Yes.
So yeah, it's simple. GUI's there. GUI's easy. Updates are easy. Veeam 12 upgrade for us was easy. We had one bump. They had a patch already that we didn't know was there. That was easy. I mean, so it's just it's good old fashioned blocking and tackling, and you guys are getting the job done. Not a lot of razzle dazzle, but that's okay. Again, we don't need razzle and dazzle in backup and recovery. We just need stuff to work. And I mean, we're not done yet. Obviously, we need to do some restores, and we're doing a bunch of other stuff. And when we get there, we'll have a really complete story of how this thing worked in the environment. But I mean, we're putting it to the test just like a customer would. And I would just suggest the easiest way to learn more about the appliance is to just to go try it. I'm sure you guys are doing some POCs and stuff like that, and that's the easiest path forward.
Yep. Couldn't agree more. And that's exactly what we love to hear, is you putting it through its paces just like any other customer would, because that's where the real value, from your review comes in. Been there, done that. here's the results, you know, so that's awesome.
No, we're worse than a customer, because a real customer would have like proper networking and data center hygiene. We're your worst possible case, because we're doing all sorts
Yeah.
of stupid stuff in the lab at all times. So we'll find a way. We'll make it exciting.
Well, awesome. And any final thoughts from you, Ryan, before we wrap up?
No, I just appreciate the time that
Yeah.
you, Brian, and Kevin and the team over there at StorageView have put in, just to
Yeah.
put the Boxers paces with what you're looking to do, and hopefully extend that further. And I'll be waiting on email to see what you run into and help out with. So
All right.
Yeah.
We promise to try to break it.
just be nice, and I won't schedule multiple hours. Next time we'll.
I was about to say, we'll schedule a 2-hour tech call to see how things are going with you.
You get 15 minutes. That's it.
Well, guys, be sure, for those of you who are watching, if you hadn't already followed Storage Review, be sure to do that. Give the YouTube channel for Object First a follow. Stay tuned for more content coming from us. And, on behalf of Ryan and myself and the whole Object First team, Brian, thank you so much for joining us today. We really do appreciate it. And with that, guys, we will see you on the next one. Y'all have a great week.
Thank you.
Have a good one.